Today I'm talking to Suzanne Whitby. Welcome, Suzanne.
Hello, hello. Nice to see you.
We've met at one of the global participants meetings, and it's online meeting. And your title, what you do, really kind of piqued my interest here, and it has to do with talking about futures and thinking about futures. And futures is plural. I'm going to talk about that too. I think it got me started on this road because of a talk that Phoebe Tickle gave last year in the Global Summit and also the year before in the Global Summit, where she talks about more imagination. So how can you imagine the future? And I thought it was a really interesting topic, so that's why I invited you. I'm looking for ideas about the future, but then in preparation of this conversation, I found so many things that you are doing today. So let's see how we can at least talk about some of those things that you do. Um, well, one of the things is that you teach at the university in the Netherlands.
No, I don't. No, I'm doing a
Oh,
PhD at the university in the Netherlands at the FU. So yeah, I wanted to do a PhD in Innsbruck, but they didn't want me, and it turns out that the FU was just a bit more open-minded to do something batty and crazy like futures and storytelling and place. So
so thank you for making that clear. And FU is the Free University of Amsterdam,
that's
right?
correct. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. Um, why? Because you have done already so many studies. What's it with knowledge, getting more knowledge for you? What does it mean? What does it do to you?
So the reason that I decided to do it was twofold. So one, I had just finished doing a master's, and I'd been looking at olfactory futures, so experiential smelling futures of ancient Pompeii. And I finished doing this, and I was really excited about it. I was working with sensors, and I was working with mapping and creating sensory maps and smell maps. And I loved it so much. And I thought, oh, how can I do more of this? How can I study more of it? And I thought, oh, I'll do my PhD. And then I thought, oh, I don't think that I can, in good faith, do another PhD in classics because we have all of these problems. And so I tried to work out how I could potentially uh, combine this interest of mine in sensory studies and storytelling and futures and walking. And I came up with an idea and I thought I would pitch it, and I never thought they'd go for it. And they did. And I can't tell you what a gift it is. I come from South Africa, and it's not free to do university in South Africa. It's also not cost effective. It's not 1,000 euros or 2,000 euros a year. It's a remortgaging of your home, and I can't believe that I am so privileged to be able to study, at this university and learn. And every day, I can't tell you how jealous I am of people who do this when they are 20, because it is such a gift. All this knowledge, all of the stuff that's out there, all the stuff that's free to learn, is it's just very exciting. So yeah, it's a joy.
Okay, sensory map. What does that? What is that? What does it mean?
What does that mean? What do you mean?
Oh, you say the word like sensory map, like it's like the
Oh, a
normal.
sensory map. Oh, yes. So a sensory map is, so basically one of the problems that we have is when we talk about smells, what does a smell mean? Or what does a sound mean? You can say to me, oh, that sounds like whatever. But what I'm hearing and what you're hearing are two slightly different things. I can say, oh my gosh, pea soup, that smells delicious. And you'll be like, oh my God, that's absolutely terrible. Soup, that's awful. We don't have good words to describe many of our sensory things. And we have a real challenge because we can't really say that what you're sensing is exactly the same as me. And often we can't visualize them, right? We can visualize what we see. I can say to you, okay, there's a building. We've both got a good idea about what a building is. But when I ask you to visualize, what does a bad smell look like? Or what does the smell of pea soup, look like? Can you show me? Often we can't. So we try to use sensory maps in order to try to visualize what different senses look like. often in urban spaces. So there's a fantastic scientist, she's not a scientist, she's a researcher come designer named Kate McLean. And she's really one of the pioneers in creating olfactory maps, or I think she called them smell maps. And she would create these fantastic maps where you'd walk through a city and she'd have 10 or 15 different people who would be, smelling, actively smelling, what are you smelling? What sort of smells are passing you? Smell a wall, do something really, really active. And then she would map and say what kinds of smells people were smelling. And she would visualize them with beautiful colors. Sometimes she would visualize them. She did a fantastic smell map, for example, of Edinburgh, where she used fat. Okay, so fat from, I think it was probably from, I don't know, tallow or something. And she used this to kind of visualize the amount of fatty smells that you saw as you walked through Edinburgh. And so it's really about making these things that we can't see eye visible using design, using maps. Yeah, that sort of thing.
I still have a hard time of grasping this
Okay.
because I can't imagine how can you see a smell? How can you picture a smell?
Well, you've got to be quite creative with your design, right? So I might say, for example, for me, all bad smells are brown, right? But brown's not my favorite color. Let's pretend that's my bad smell signal. I would then potentially take a map of Amsterdam or of Innsbruck, where I live, and I would work with people to walk around and see where do they smell things that they think are good, where do they smell things that are bad, and I can then map these colors onto that map of Innsbruck to indicate where people say they find things that are bad smells or good smells. Or do I find, for example, that there's a divide? So let's pretend that pink is a great smell and brown is a terrible smell. And we've kind of got a 50-50 split. What does that say to us, right? What does that say to us about people and what they're scenting and how different we are in terms of what we perceive as good and bad? Right. So it's just, it's not necessarily about making the smell look like something familiar, but giving us some sort of symbol so that we can connect smell to place or sound to place, right?
Okay, so and then what do you do with it? So I have a map of Innsbruck or of Amsterdam with the smells on it in colors.
Mm.
What do we do with that then?
You appreciate it. You just enjoy the fact that we're so different.
Hmm.
I'm sure that you see this in your work as a coach, but we make assumptions about how similar other people are to ourselves. I assume that when I say to you, doesn't that blah, blah, blah soup smell good? I'm assuming you're going to say, oh, yes, that smells delicious. But in actual fact, you might be thinking, oh, that's the most terrible smell in the world. I've got to leave this place. And I think actually being able to visualize this stuff allows us to reinforce this idea that people have got different perceptions, and that's okay, right? And I think we all live in these little bubbles, and smell and sensory stuff is just one piece of that. But being able to show people that we're all good, we all have valid opinions, but they may not be the same, and we all live in the same place. We all think that people who live in the same place and look like us have the same sort of opinions, but we don't. Even when it comes down to something as silly, I don't think it's silly, but some might say silly as smell, for example.
And how would you use this information, not the smell part, but the idea that we are so different and we don't see it in your new quest, I would say, with your new studies, and especially when you think about, you know, uh, the future of the planet, the futures of the planet.
Yeah, so the reason that this all came together was because I've been working in, or I had been working in sort of sustainability education, climate change education for a while, and I had felt that it wasn't really working, and I knew from the work that I do with scientists that most of us, we don't change our minds based on facts. We change our minds based on emotions, how we feel. And when I started doing this work, when I started doing my PhD and thinking about this a little bit more, I came across this concept, which again, you might be very familiar with, of psychological distance, right? So when it comes to climate change, and it doesn't have to be climate change, it can be anything, environmental stuff or, social inclusion stuff, you put the thing that makes you happy here. We have this issue, right? Because we talk about, and I'm going to use climate change as an example. We talk about this terrible stuff that's going to happen to people who live in Africa, right? That's a long way away from the experience of somebody, for example, in Innsbruck, Austria, right? Not only that, it's happening to people who are a long way away, but it's also happening to people who look completely different and appear to have a whole bunch of different cultural, historical, value-based beliefs, etc. In comparison to what we assume is here, right? So we've got two things there. We've got our spatial, and we've got our social distance. Then, of course, we've got something like climate change. So we're sort of seeing that there are impacts, but they're going to take so long to hit us, right? It's really far away, so we're even more distant. And on top of all of this, how do we experience this? We are these incredible sensory creatures in the best possible way, right? We go through life and we don't even notice it. Everything that we do in life is dictated by touch, by what we hear, by what we see. We could not function without these stupid mobile phones of ours, right? And we see them all the time. And so when I was thinking about the sensory stuff, I thought to myself, the sensory stuff is a really big part of how we experience how we live. What happens if you could bring this sensory experience into futures, right? So possible futures where we've won, as Rob Hopkins says about climate change, or we haven't won, right? Or we've gone down some peculiar path. What happens if we can bring people into a place that they're familiar with, which means that that we remove the spatial distance, right? So we've kind of tackled that, and we give them this opportunity to feel, to pre-experience a possible future with all of their senses, right? So that's the experiential stuff, with people who are familiar with the same place and who they get to know during a workshop or an experience. So that closes the social distance. This is a way of reducing all of these distances. And maybe it's a way of encouraging people to, I obviously in my head, I'm hoping that people will act, but if nothing else, just talk about it, or be more aware of it, or become more resilient, using this mixture of sensory and futures and so on.
Okay, I have a question on this topic then. I just saw this post on LinkedIn through my stupid phone. Um, yes, here it is. And it is by Maren Urne.
Mm-hmm.
She's a neuroscientist and a professor in sustainable transformation, and she's written a couple of books.
Mm-hmm.
I like what she writes all the time because she makes me think. And in this post, and I will put the link in the show notes for people
Mm-hmm.
can read it too. It is about all the information that we have and how people talk about climate change. And instead of having conversations with each other about climate change, are we realistic to talk about climate change with each other? Is a question at the bottom of the post.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
And
it's not a great topic, is it? Let's be honest.
well, what I was why I made this connection with this post, what you were just explaining. So you were and I replied to a post because you were talking about this distance between people like in Africa, like distance in space, but also like the social distance because
Mm-hmm.
these people look different than I do.
Mm-hmm.
But I see the same problem here, close to us, right?
Yeah,
So I
cool.
see the same problem here. People, the social distance is closer. Even they look exactly like me. They live close by, so they live in the same town, and they think completely different about this topic.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it is. No, it's not. Maybe of course, it probably is very easy to talk to people who think similar about climate change. They know the data because he's mentioning the data from this weather forecasting organization. How bad 2024 was already. March was the hottest March of in centuries. So she talks about these climate changes in relationship to weather that we've already see going on. We probably have passed the 1.5 degrees from Paris in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So this is data, right?
Yep.
We know the data, and if we are similar, you think like me, you think this data is really bad. You think we have to do something about this.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a large group of people who don't really care about this data, or they have a completely different feeling about this data. They think it's not our problem. They think it's not true. They don't trust the data. They don't understand the data. So there's a lot of people out there who would really need this conversation. And it is very difficult to talk with them about this because they have a different feeling about the information that we look at. So you talk about the smell, but I think the same is true for like data like this.
It's not. I'll tell you
Okay,
why.
okay.
So, well, and this is my perception, right? I'm totally open for people to tell me that I'm wrong. So, I think I told you that I work with a lot of scientists, and I work with them with communication skills. And the reason I got into this was because a lot of scientists were saying, "Well, I'm giving people the facts, right? Facts. It's you can't argue with this. Here's the data, right?" But there is this thing called the deficit model of science communication. And this is when we go in and we say, all I need to do is be very neutral because I'm a scientist, right? I'm not a scientist, but if I am, and all I need to do is come in. I don't need to give people all of this emotion. I don't need to kind of connect with them on this very human level. All I need to do is show them, here are the facts and figures. We've come across this data very impartially, but it's not subjective. This is objective data. And if you just look at this data, you will see that it is totally rational for you to behave in this way. We know from the research that's been done that that is actually not how humans function. And funnily enough, it's not actually how scientists function either. Because I work with a lot of climate scientists, and I have many climate scientists who are friends, and they all have their own justification for why they should still be allowed to fly. And why, of course, they're going to have a steak tonight, right? Because they're human, and it's not an issue for me. But this is just the reality, right? The stuff that I'm doing, my research with this, with futures and emotions and experience, it's not about people going and having a conversation at dinner and saying, "Oh, did you know this terrible thing's going to happen with climate change?" I'm not talking about climate change in my workshops, right? My aim is to get people to shift the bar on climate change, but I'm not giving them facts and figures about climate change. Most people have enough information to know that there's possibly a problem out there, right? What I'm hoping that they'll do is they will go home and they'll have a conversation with their friends or their husband, and they'll say, "Gosh, you won't believe what happened today. I went to this workshop and I was shown 4 different futures. None of them exist. In one of these futures, climate change was terrible. In another one, AI helped us solve problems. In another future, there was this terrible collapse, but it was incredible. Humans were able to get through this all. There were little clumps of humans who were doing great things, And in another future, this happened, but none of them existed. And do you know what we did at the end of this? With my little group of people, of 12 people, we sat down and we thought about what future would we like to have? And then we thought to ourselves, what do we see in this future? How do people behave to one another? What kind of food do we eat? What does the air smell like when there are no cars? What does it sound like when there are no buses going past? Oh my gosh, we can hear the birds, right? So there they are, immersing themselves in this future. They're not coming back and saying to people, "Oh, climate change, terrible thing, all this stuff you've got to give up." They're coming back and they're saying, "I did this really cool workshop. Did you know that we, individual people, we have the ability, even on a small level, to shape the futures we want?" And most people are not going to be saying, "We want to have more noise pollution, or more, I don't know, waste dumps outside of my house." That's not what people are talking about. Most people want the same sorts of things, right? When it comes down to these conversations, that's what they're talking about, not climate change. And what they're telling people about is that experience. What did I see? What did I pre-experience? How lovely was that? I want this. This is not something I have to give up. This is something that I can go for. That's what I'm trying to do. Whether it'll work or not, Anna, I have no idea, but that's the idea.
Well, sorry to do this again, but let's see. I saw this other post. I will put the link in the show notes again,
Mm-hmm.
which talking about futures. That's why I'm bringing this up now. Is there's this place where they have like miniature worlds. So it's like an exposition. It's in Hamburg, yeah. It says
Mm.
miniature wonderland in Hamburg.
Yeah.
But it's a post by Michael Fritz.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a video that's been created by, let's see, Brüder Frederick, Garrett Brown, and Sebastian Drexler. I think
Okay.
it is. I think it is. So I will post the link so to in the show notes so you can look it up yourself because there's a short video which is only 1.5 minutes, and this the parents take her daughter to this miniature land, and you see all these famous cities, like in miniature,
Hmm.
and there is a screen in front of it, a tablet with a headphone, and she puts on the headphone, and there's like options to put it like to 1.5 degrees and to 5 degrees.
Oh, wow.
So what it does, it shows her a future
Hmm.
of what could happen to these areas. But
Hmm.
everybody's having like fun and joy while they're being in this exposition,
Hmm.
and she's the only one looking at the screens for the possible futures, which these possible futures you are describing also really interesting and curious and beautiful future, but she's only seeing these bad futures, right? So, and she's going from this one part to the exposition to all these various parts, seeing this, looking at the video and seeing what happens when the world heats up to 1.5 or 5 degrees, and you see her face really getting sad, and then she's shouting in the end, says, "Why are you not seeing this? Why are you not seeing this? Why are you not watching?" And I think that's interesting, right? So it's interesting that, like you just mentioned, like the scientists, we are human. So apparently, we don't want to see the bad future that we are causing. Maybe is that an idea?
Yeah, I think
Because we want to go take a plane to a sunny beach somewhere in the winter, and we want that steak on our plate because we love the smell of, and the taste of meat, right? Or we want to have a car because we want to feel freedom. But we also know that cars are bad, and we know that um, meat is not good for the planet. We know that traveling by plane over short distances is really bad for the environment. We all know this
yeah.
logically, right? We in our head we know this, and if we are good humans, we probably even feel like a bit of shame when we do this, but we still do it because you just mentioned we are humans.
And this is all to do with our cognitive biases and our cognitive dissonance, right? So how we can make excuses just to justify us, and the justification might not be going to a sunny place, but it might be, oh, you know what, I'm a climate scientist and I'm very important, and it's really important that I come to this conference, and I could catch the train, but it will take me 3 days to do that. And that doesn't make sense because there's all this other stuff that I need to do, or it's going to cost 3 times as much, and my university won't allow it, right? So sometimes these things seem to be really good excuses. I think what we sometimes do is we focus so much on the stuff that we have to give up or stop doing. It doesn't have to be climate change. You can think about, again, I come from South Africa, and I'm a white South African. And there is a bit of rhetoric in South Africa amongst white South Africans about, oh, it's so hard to get a job if you're not black, because black people are getting the jobs because we're trying to correct for apartheid. And this is something I haven't lived in South Africa for a while, so I can't get too much into that. But what I can say is that rather than saying, oh, how terrible this is, we can't get a job, maybe the response is, God, isn't this an amazing opportunity? What if we created new companies? What if we became entrepreneurs? What if instead of not being able to eat that meat on your plate, you could da 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 da? My husband and I, definitely not perfect when it comes to climate change, but we moved from a petrol car to an electric car, and about 2 years ago we gave up our car and decided no more flying, no more cars, and so on. And so far we haven't had to go to South Africa for anything emergent, anything urgent, because otherwise that's not realistic. But so far everything's good, and I tell you, every day we get up and we're like, ooh, what exciting adventure can we do today with the train? It's going to take us 5 hours to get there, but what an adventure. And it's not always a positive adventure. Sometimes it's a real pain in the backside, but we're trying to reframe it. And I think that that's sometimes it's future stuff. When you get people to pre-experience possibilities, it's about reframing a bit. And it's not about this utopia, right? So that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to say to people, oh, if we give up all this stuff and become hopeful and sustainable, it's going to be amazing. No, it won't. There are still going to be problems, right? But just focusing a bit more on what we could have rather than what we lose. I think would be interesting. And I think adults in particular, we focus so much on what we're going to lose than, rather than what we're going to gain. And yeah, that's what I'm trying to tackle for what it's worth.
Well, I just want to give you back. I really think this is really valuable. So for what it's worth, it's really worth a lot. Thinking about possible futures is one way of looking at the same problem in different ways. And I really like that way how you frame this. So thank you for that. I think, but the second part is also looking at different futures, possible futures, is a way of building like active hope of you have an influence, like you just mentioned. We are part of the future. We can influence the future, influence our own futures. Of course, there is also the part, I can do something about my
Yeah.
impact and my handprint of what I do. Like you just shared what you do, that's like
Mm-hmm.
part of your handprint. And at the same time, if we would shut down like Tata Steel in the Netherlands, the impact would be so much higher, right? So it's like and right. We have to also make sure that they move forward and that the government creates rules and laws to make these things impossible and follow up on the laws that they've created to stop these companies to avoid the laws that they've created, stuff like that. So to make sure that they stick to the laws that we've built. So I think it's and right. So
Mm-hmm.
so, so I really like the way that you talk about building different futures in your workshop, talking about this so that you get ideas. Oh, this is also possible. It's not just this one future that, like this scientist is painting for us. It's really going down the drain. It's really bad. You can create like multiple futures for us, for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and then determine what you can do to be a part of that future, how you can get to that future.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I just throw in, so what you're talking about with, with the steelworks and so on, you're talking about system change, right? And I have to be honest, I come across as a bit Pollyanna, so very sort of, oh, very hopeful and everything's going to be great. Because I think, why not? I have that choice, right? I can do that. But in my heart, I'm quite pragmatic about this, we've missed the 1.5 degree uh, threshold, right? We're probably going to miss 2 degrees. Certainly where I live in Austria, we're going to lose our glacier. Right, that's unless something happens tomorrow, which it's not going to happen. Right, this is the reality. So I think the other thing that's very interesting about futures is, so yes, lovely. It would be great if the systems changed. Realistically speaking, it's going to take time. And one of the things that's so great about futures, I think, a lot of people say to me when I'm working with them in lots of different contexts, not just climate change. They say to me, "What can I do?" I'm one person, right? They don't feel that they've got this concept of agency, the sense of agency. And the great thing about futures is that it shows you that you matter, even if it's only in your social circle, even if it's only in your friends and family, even if it only means that you can decide what kind of job you want, right? So that's that agency piece, which I think is huge, right? And the second thing that futures allow you to do, if you play with these experimental or imaginative futures, you travel into these futures and you see a terrible future, right? And you eat these awful these foods that you don't want to eat, and you smell this terrible air, and then you move into another future and it's different, right? You come back and you're like, oh well, that was just imagination. Of course, it's just imagination. You throw them away; they don't exist. But you have had the opportunity to pre-experience those futures. So if something terrible happens and it has some aspect of that future in it, you are a bit more prepared. You're a bit more resilient, right? There's she's very popular at the moment. There's a woman named Jane McGonigal, and she's a game designer and a futurist, and she did an experiment or conducted an experiment in 2010. Very cool experiment. So the experiment was that she designed a game. She got a whole pile of people, many people, thousands, I think it was, to play this game. And the theme of the game was da, 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 pandemic, right? And people had to live in this world. So they lived a parallel life. Every day they went to work, but they had to think, oh gosh, what would it be like if there was a pandemic and we couldn't go to work? What would it be like if we went to the shops and there was no food? And of course, 10 years later, what happened? COVID. And the people who had participated in this game actually wrote to this woman and said, yeah, COVID's terrible and we're stuck at home and it's awful, but actually we feel psychologically and physically more capable of dealing with it because we've gone through it already. So this other thing about futures is not just about changing the world, but it's about giving you additional resilience in what is a very challenging time to be alive, I think. So I think there's that other aspect. It's not just about changing the world, it's about resilience, right?
Yeah, I agree so much because I like scenario thinking.
Mm,
So it's been, I wouldn't say invented, but at least I know it from this guy who worked at Shell, and they've been doing scenario thinking for decennia already. And then you have the book, The Black Swan.
mm,
And to me, these are very related and exactly like what you just described, right? So if you have like a game-like environment where you play possible scenarios and like you just mentioned, possible futures, right?
yeah,
Possible scenarios of what could happen in the future. You and I always talk about this with my clients too, right? I bring them to the topic scenario thinking. So think about the worst things that could happen
yeah,
with your clients or in your market, especially now, right?
mm,
What would happen if something really bad happens and things appear to go that way? What would happen to your company? What would you do? How would you change? How would you pivot? What kind of options could you think of you could be doing if this would happen? So think about the bad scenarios and then think about options that you could do. And I think, and I tell them, and what it really does, it really prepares you. It really makes you see when something similar comes towards you. You can see, you can recognize this because you have been thinking about, you have been playing with this. And that's why I like scenario thinking so much. And that's, I think, probably is also why I asked you for this conversation because I think it's really important. And like you just mentioned, it's not about the hope, just building hope and become active for yourself to create this future, but also to be prepared because bad things will happen to us. And if you play these various scenarios for yourself, you are more prepared to see them and to think about what you could do them, and then probably also be sooner in taking action when this happens to us. So again, thank you for making this very clear. Okay, you mentioned a couple of times you have these conversations and helping scientists to communicate better. Tell a bit more about that part.
yeah. So my background is actually in communication. So I've been involved in all sorts of communication roles for about 21 years. I've been self-employed, very exciting. Da, da, da. And about 10 years ago, it was 2010 actually. My husband is an atmospheric physicist, and we moved to Boulder in Colorado, and we stayed there for 4 years. And whilst we were there, the BP Horizon oil spill took place, and there were a whole bunch of scientists that we were connected to at the time, and some of them started coming to me and saying, okay, the press now wants to talk to me about this stuff, but I don't know exactly how to do it, and I know that you're doing some communication stuff for corporates, but could you maybe coach me? And so I did some sort of pro bono coaching for a number of scientists. And then, of course, word just gets around that there's somebody in town who is happy to play with you and work with communication. And when we came back to Innsbruck in 2014, I decided to turn that into a business. I decided to shift from working with entrepreneurs and with my intercultural work, and I shifted to working with scientists. So I work with scientists across Europe. I've done quite a lot of work with folks in the US as well, but I like to do Europe because I like to hop on a train and go and see people. And even more so now that we have this little geopolitical problem at the moment. And yeah, and it's interesting because when I was doing this work, I thought to myself, how does this really fit in with my sustainability stuff? And how does this fit in with my future stuff? Because it all feels very disparate. But one of the things that I've realized is that if we want to have better futures, right? If we want to have futures where we're more sustainable, where, we still have elephants and polar bears and, biodiversity in the places that we live, we really need to be able to leverage what scientists and researchers are doing, right? They're doing all this hard work. They're coming up with these experiments. They're coming up with innovative ideas. Maybe they're not the private companies who are going out and creating, turning these things into innovations that make money, but they're doing the groundwork that is basically going to help us create this future. So I feel like it works really well at the moment. And, the majority of the scientists that I work with they tend to be STEM subjects. Every now and again, I work with researchers from the humanities and so on, but it tends to be more, STEM. So it's often the life scientists, the mathematicians, the engineers, and these, very clever people who just aren't necessarily fantastic at communicating what they're doing and why it's important with the rest of us. And so, yeah, that's the kind of work that I do with them.
And why do they feel that they need this? Why, what is it they are missing today that they feel they need something like this?
So I think so. What we found now, if we think about the funding, so a lot of our scientists and researchers, their projects are funded by European projects or by national projects, and what that means that they're actually funded by our taxpayer money in Europe. Yeah. And so, to a large extent, scientists and researchers have a responsibility to tell society what they're doing with that money, right? Theoretically speaking, the sort of science that we're doing, the research that we're doing, should not just be done just because it's interesting to do research, but also because it's benefiting society as a whole. And even if that benefit is just, gosh, this is so interesting, right? I think that's also a valid reason to do science. It doesn't have to necessarily be a product. And I think the real challenge that people have had in the past is uh, you work in this silo, this very specialist area for X years, and then somebody says, "What do you do?" And the only language that you have to explain it is something that's straight out of a textbook that an ordinary person who's not in your field would not understand. And what we're finding is that a lot of the universities, the research institutions, they want to have more outreach with the public. They want the public to support what they're doing, right? And many of the grant and proposal channels that are out there at the moment, when people want to apply for a grant, there is a section in the proposal that says, how are you going to disseminate your research with the public? How are you going to tell the public what you've done, why it's interesting, why it's worthwhile, etc. So I think that's a really big thing. And then I think the other thing really is, we live in times where we have all these fake facts. We need our scientists to be able to tell us, and not just scientists, researchers, right? So in English, we have a difference between sort of science and research. I know in German, it's pretty much the same thing. But we need these people to be able to stand up and say, actually, the facts are this, right? They need to stand up for science, right? So we need them to be able to speak the language of every man or every woman to be able to do that. And then I think the third thing is, science for the longest time has been very male, very white, right? We want people from everywhere to get involved in science. We've got great scientists and researchers in Africa. They just don't have the cash to come over to Europe and participate in our conferences, right? We need to have this fantastic diversity of men and women and, gender non-binary and black and white and pink and whatever color people want to be. If they want to paint themselves, that's great. We need those people to come and do that science and then go and tell people about it, so that other person who is a young girl or a young, gender non-binary person or a black person or an Indian person can say, that person's a scientist and I want to be a scientist too, right? I can do that too. And so this is why we have to have this. It is absolutely critical. And honestly, it's really funny. I've never thought about this, but in such detail. But I think that if we want to create these hopeful, sustainable futures, we need everybody to be able to have these opportunities, and that includes in our research institutions. So, sorry, I feel like I got a bit emotional now.
That's good. I think it really shows that you really care for this. And I was thinking about the Black Wonder Woman, was it? I think it was Wonder Woman, right? Who was black. It gave like a lot of young black girls the idea that they can be like a superhero.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yeah, it's really important that you have like examples out there that you can feel aligned with, that you feel, okay, this is someone like me, like woman, or black woman, or right,
Yeah.
any.
And we really forget about these things. So it's not very long ago that if a woman got married, she was no longer allowed to remain in a university. She had to leave, right? In the same way she'd have to leave her job. And we know somebody here who came over, started her PhD, really bright, fantastic, delicious lady, and she fell pregnant and she had a baby. And she carried on doing her PhD because her supervisors supported her. And then male supervisors, they were totally fine with it, right? And then she had another baby. And last week, she finished her PhD. She did her PhD defense, and everything's done. She's now a doctor, blah blah blah, with two children. And she finished her PhD as a woman, unmarried, with two children. And she did it faster than loads of the white single men who were in that university. And I'm not. I think it's great that she did this, but isn't that great for any woman who decides that they want to have a child whilst they're doing a PhD? Because so many women drop out because they think that how do you juggle your time? She's now just shown all of those women you can totally do this. Not one child, two children, right? So this is really important, I think. So
I completely agree. I think it's really important that you have examples and that also like people like her are able to communicate about this, right? They are able to show and tell people how they did this, that it is possible to get a PhD and to have two children and be a single woman so that other, like you just mentioned, other women think, oh, I can do this too. And like you just mentioned, like you mentioned a couple of things that you do in your life like the train, for
mm-hmm.
example, make it like a interesting journey, like an adventure, right? So if people see that you have like, if you don't talk about it, you think, okay, I'm just doing this, and I'm not sure if I'm doing the best thing, and I'm just doing it for myself. That's fine, but it's a lot better when you share these stories like you do, because then people can see, oh, I can do this too if I just do this a bit different. So I like that a lot. Yes, I was wondering at one part I didn't understand quite well when I was preparing this. So you were born and raised in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Then at some point you came to Austria,
Mm-hmm.
but you went to Boulder,
Mm-hmm.
USA, and then you came back to Austria.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What um, what changed in your life that you decided to go to Austria?
I found a Tyrolean. I lived in the UK for a while, and I got very disillusioned by the corporate world. I didn't realize how many lies there are in the corporate world, so I chucked in my job and I went to Australia. And I was in Brisbane one evening, and this rather lovely Tyrolean chap walked into my room one evening, and we talked about all the stuff you shouldn't. We talked about politics, religion, and sex. And then he told me at about 2 o'clock in the morning to please shut up because he was very tired, right? This is a language issue. And we spent a day together the following day. And he then went back to Austria. I stayed in Australia for a while. And when I came back to Europe, I thought, I've had enough of Europe. I'm going to go back to South Africa. But before I do, I'll just pop over to Austria and see what this lovely Tyrolean is like. And here we are, 20 years later. So yes, it was a man. That was the reason. That was the reason my life changed.
Well, not quite, because at some point you made a decision to go to Australia.
That's true.
And then at some point you made a decision to go to UK first because the UK happened something, and then so why did you go to the UK first? What was there?
I'm ashamed to admit that it was another boyfriend. Love, it was love. It just didn't last.
You
So,
thrive on love, I guess.
well, only twice, right? So second time's working out a bit better than the first.
Okay. Well, I don't think it's something you should be embarrassed about. I think it's a lot better than when you're driven by money and say, I went to the UK because I want to make a lot more money than I did in South Africa, which is a fair reason too, but it kind of like, I think it sounds a bit different than going for love, right? Um, okay. So you decided 21 years ago, you start your own business.
Mhm.
Um, what is the most interesting pivot that you made in those years? What do you think was most important to you to change the way that you worked?
So, do you mean at whilst I've been self-employed?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It's a little bit difficult to say, to be honest with you, because I feel like I change, I reinvent myself every year. And very interestingly, I have a friend who is a life coach, and we sort of exchange services from time to time. And every 5 or 6 years, he says, "It's really interesting that you're talking to me about this, Suzanne, because I'm sure you were talking to me about this 5 years ago." And so I go in sort of 4 or 5 year cycles. And so I guess what was the thing that's been most pivotal to me? I think maybe. I don't know, so maybe in about 2018, 2019, I decided to start doing more stuff with sustainability. So I had been doing my communication stuff, which was great, and I was doing lots of mm, kind of pro bono, sort of, just courses and so on to kind of raise awareness. And around 2018, 2019, I thought to myself, well, it's great to be working with citizens, but it feels very unfair to put all of the burden on citizens when we have these systems. So can I work with businesses? And I think that that led me down some really interesting paths that got me a lot deeper into the future stuff that I do now. Previously, I was only working with futures as a storyteller, as an oral storyteller, so more kind of entertainment, so thought entertainment. So 2018, 2019, I went down this path. And I also started actively running sustainability and climate workshops for businesses, saying to them, sustainability is good for business. So that's probably in the most recent time. I think also the reason that that's important to me, the reason that I think that that's significant, um, is because it feels that it aligns very much with what's important to me. Right. So I can't say that the work is necessarily so much more interesting than all the work I did before because I throw away stuff that's not interesting quite quickly, I'm afraid to say. But I think it just feels right. I don't want to lie on my deathbed and think, oh my God, I did nothing. Right. I don't ever want someone to point a finger at me. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the best I can offer.
No, no, I think it does, and I see a lot of correlation with how I feel about things. And I wonder, because you mentioned how you saw the connection between the environmental things and agency, sustainability, and the work you did with the communication. So you are able to connect like a red thread all the things that you did in the past to the way you want to work in the future. Like I see that you connect, you pick up new things and you have like a story for yourself how these all align to the bigger picture for you.
Yeah, and let me tell you, that took a long time to do that, right? Because for the longest time, I was like, well, what am I? Am I a communication expert? I'm a storyteller. I'm a sustainability person. I'm a this. I'm a that. And I was like, no one knows what I am, and it's really only recently, literally maybe in the last year, that I've been able to pull all the strands together and say I feel really comfortable that these all support this umbrella vision of mine. But it was really hard. So if anybody struggles with that, it's tough. I feel that pain.
And how do people respond to that? That you have so many different
Mhm. Strands.
expertises.
I don't. So I've given up trying to tell everybody what I do. So I've kind of narrowed it down to three things. I've got to be really careful how I introduce myself. So I did a book binding course recently. I just thought, oh, how interesting, how creative to bind a book. And the guy said, oh, what do you do? And in German, I said, oh, I co-create hopeful, sustainable futures. I was just trying it out. And he looked at me, he was really quiet. And then he said, so you're a politician? I said, no, I'm not a politician. So I learned that you've got to decide how you want to introduce yourself, and then you've got to test it, and you've got to test different cultures, and then at some point you just own it and you just go with it, right? So, but no, it's impossible for everybody to follow everything I do. I don't think my husband knows everything that I do. Such is life.
Yeah, no, I agree. It means that for me it meant that I've lost a lot of people on route, right? So when you change um, to a new expertise because you really think it's important and you really think that you want to do this now, even in my stories, I can connect them to all the other things I did before. For other people on the outside, it's sometimes very difficult to connect these things.
Mhm.
And then they lose you in the story and they go like, oh, what is he doing now? He's not talking about this topic that I found very interesting anymore. He's now talking about something completely different. I don't want to follow him anymore. So that's what I've noticed. I have a story in my head, how it's all connected. But other people don't hear this song in my head, right? They don't know what the lyrics of the song is, right? They know the melody, but they have no clue what the lyrics really are.
What a lovely visual. But then the question, so I have to ask you the same question. So how do you does everybody know what you do? How do you tackle this problem?
No, I think I figured out in 2018.
Hmm.
So before, like you, I did a lot of things, and before that, I did a lot of things online. So I was would say, head group of new things that were coming up, especially in marketing and communication kind of field. So like
Okay.
I was really early with LinkedIn and Facebook. So I talked a lot about that, how you could use that for your business, how you can use digital communications, how you could use, video calls to have meetings instead of just going there. It's very live. It's the same feeling if you just meet them in person. It's not really the same feeling, but it's kind of almost the same feeling. It's a very comparable. So, but I was very not a lot of people believed me at that time. This was very early on these ideas, and I talked to people so how you could use a Facebook page, and that was very early with those topics, and. So every time when something like that comes, so then I was off about Facebook, then I was about LinkedIn, all the way
Mhm.
around. LinkedIn, Facebook, and then it was something else. I talked about podcasts a lot. So and everything happened online. So I was always just working online. Well, not just, but mostly. So, and I did that because I wanted to stay as much as I can working from home so that I could see my kids grow up. Then in 2018, both my kids were kind of not adults, but, almost adult and had their own lives. And I figured, so I think it's time that I go out more. I see people in real life, not just through a screen. And so in 2018, I decided to become like a business coach and have meetings, physical meetings with entrepreneurs instead of just meeting them online. So no online. I scrapped all the online stuff from my website, from everything that I did, and I switched completely to physical meetings. Either they came here to me, or I went to their place. Netherlands is a small country, so you can do it by train, and I liked it a lot. I liked it a lot to have meetings, to have conversations, to ask questions, to learn. And then COVID happened. It took me about half a year to get back to the online part,
Oh, wow.
which was kind of weird. It had, of course, a lot to do to get used to the new situation, to get familiar with everything, with the lockdown, everything was going on. But then I slowly moved back to online. Now I'm almost everything is online again for me.
Mm.
But the coaching part stuck there. I really like having conversations and asking questions, like why the podcast is so important to me. I like to learn from other people, and then along came inner development goals. So that's, I think, the two big parts of my life now is coaching and
Mhm.
talking a lot about behavior, habits. That's in my coaching plays a big role. How can you change your behavior and learn habits that makes you, a better entrepreneur in a sense of, having a more complete life as an entrepreneur and doing the things that you really want to do instead of by living the life that other people want you to live. And then looking how can inner development be used in favor of like climate change. So how can we use inner development to build this better futures, to see where we are going with mankind. And to me, it means becoming a better ancestor. That's, I think, is the overarching term that I'm using.
Okay.
So equality is a big word for me, a big feeling for me. So I'm connecting that all together with equality,
Okay. And
which
so, so just tell me. So, I'm sorry. I know I'm being a very bad guest. What does equality mean to you, and how
yeah.
do you differentiate that with equity?
I'm not sure if I know exactly what equity means, but equality means that people get this. We all get the same chances. We have the same chance to good education, for example. We have the same chance to well pay, so that everybody is paid well, not
Mhm.
just white men in the
Yeah.
western part of the world, right? We make sure that everybody has the same opportunity to go to education. So if you have money, if you don't have money, education should be made possible for everybody. It's not being, you shouldn't go into big debt to
Mm.
get an education, and because you start up with on the wrong foot in life, right? You have this really bad that's dragging you down. And so that's some of the ideas about equality for me that's really important, right? So that, and it has to do with local, so that, for example, my daughter who works in healthcare, my son who works at a bank, they are paid equally,
Mhm.
right? it doesn't have to do, it's not just always about Africa for me, or
No, no, of course.
the mines in Congo or whatever, right? So it's also here, but it's
Mm.
also our resources, where we get our resources, which needs to be fair, right? So it needs to be equal about how we use our resources. We can't just plunder Africa and treat them as the poor country because they are really rich in resources, but we don't pay them fair for their resources, or we pay people in Africa, India, China a lot less, so we get cheaper products and we need more products, which is not true. So equality means that we treat everybody so that we all have a good life, not just a couple people.
I
Does
think
that
maybe
help?
that, yeah, I think maybe that's the key thing that you've just said at the end is that everyone has a good life. Because I'm mindful that I think in German I'm not sure that there is a difference between equality and equity. I really struggle to translate this when I'm working in German. But equity is about, so for example, you might have all the universities might be free and everyone could go to the university regardless of what your background is. But the person who comes from a wealthy family with an entrepreneur who says, darling, you can do anything. Of course, you should go to university. Probably won't need as much help as a child who comes from a family that's never had anyone go to university. They need a little bit more support to A, get into the system, but also to thrive in that system. And so equity is about giving everybody what they need to be able to have that good life, which I think is what you summed up with at the end. That's what I heard anyway.
Well, I think it has to do with fair chances, right? So, and some people need like a bit more help than other people to get the same chance, right?
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Mm.
So, yeah, yeah, it sometimes feels difficult to talk about this because it's always like ideas in your head that accumulate, that become better and more focused, but you also don't want to confuse people with all the stories that go on in your head. So it's this thing. So I recognize a lot of what you're saying from myself. Okay, people, planet, prosecco.
Yes.
So I think that's one thing that stood out to me with you is the amount of things that you start and do, right? So you're doing a PhD. I didn't really realize it until you just mentioned that before. So you're doing a PhD. You are coaching and consulting these companies about futures. Then you are coaching these scientists about how to communicate better so that they can like the funds explain to citizens or people. And then you come up with all these other parts that you also want to do, right? So building a network, having conversations, do walks. How do you do this? How do you keep up with all the things that you start and you embark on?
I don't finish everything. No, I've had to get myself a notebook so that I write my ideas down before turning them into live. Ta-da! Here's a new thing. So there's a whole notebook full of things that could have happened, right? I I like trying new things, and so I have this a bit like you, right? So you did all of your stuff with you had your marketing background and you worked with online stuff. I did a lot of work with communication, but definitely visual communications, like graphic design, web design, all of that good stuff as well for a while. So for me to create a logo takes me 5 minutes, new logo, 10 minutes later, new website, right? So it's nothing for me. So it's very easy for me to get stuff up online. And then what I typically do is I give things, 6 months to a year to see how they go, because I've learned that I am impatient, and Tyrol, where I live, requires more time. At least a year to work out whether something works. And sometimes I just realize, so I love doing my walks, but I don't always have the time because sometimes I'm traveling. It's hard to book something in the morning to go for a walk when you might be, I don't know, in Kiel. And you have to balance what is going to give you money to live, which we all need, versus what gives you great joy and actually doesn't bring any money whatsoever. And so sometimes it just means that I've got to put things and put things on the side and say, you know what, I'll come back to that a little bit later, and that's okay because I think everything's got its time. It's still waiting for me. So I create many things. but I can't give everything my full level of energy and attention would be the answer.
Yeah, it's. I'm not. I don't want to make this sound wrong, but it feels a bit like you throwing spaghetti on the wall or on the fridge. What is it? And see which sticks, and see what other people like and how it goes.
Sometimes I think that all of my ideas are absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. No, I
But not every
understand.
no, but not everybody else does, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
sometimes you've got to bow to the market.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that would be um, a good explanation of how my approach. I'm maybe not throwing spaghetti. I think there's a little bit more thought, but
No, that's what I'm trying to say.
yeah,
I didn't want to make it sound
I
bad,
know,
but I think it's like putting ideas out there and see what goes and what gets traction, and then once it does, you go put more energy into that.
yeah.
Um, I was talking to this other brilliant person lately, and she was talking about ideas floating in the air,
Mhm.
and if you don't pick it up, somebody else will have the same idea and run with it.
It's terrifying. Terrifying. What if somebody takes your idea and they steal it and then you kick yourself for the rest of your life? Yes, I resonate.
So I think you've answered it quite well. But let's say, for example, you have this great idea, you put the website up, you had a logo, and everything is there, right? But it doesn't get traction for some reason, whatever the reason is. It doesn't really matter. But it doesn't get traction that you hope for, so it kind of like you put it on pause. So it's kind of like waiting there.
Mhm.
But then somebody else, even without seeing your idea, has the same idea and somehow finds the right audience and gets traction and just goes. What does it do then? What does it do to you?
Well, I'd be very sad, and I would probably have to have a few glasses of wine, and my husband would have to become a little therapist. And I'd say, "Well, why not me? Right? I'm the victim here. Like, how could this happen? Why does the universe not love me?" And then after I'd got over my hangover, I'd come up with a new idea and go in a new direction. But I'd need the wine, the hangover, the therapy in order to kind of get through that.
Yeah, I think that's a great that's a great description. I also like the idea of what Seth Godin writes about. Seth Godin is a great marketeer. I love his books. Very wise man for me. And he writes about when you have this idea, this market, this product, and you are a great person who likes repetition, and you are able to sell the same product to like thousands of companies, you will make a lot of money. If you are someone like me and you like new ideas all the time, you like to put up new projects, that means you have fewer clients. You will never be rich, but you have a full life.
Mm. And that's what I mean, but what a great thing. I also wonder, to kind of build on that, whether these ideas are stepping stones. So when I started working on my thing with Pompeii, I initially wanted to do something with perfumes. I was going to recreate perfumes from ancient Greece. This was my big idea. And my supervisor said, "No, you can't do that." And I won't go into that. But anyway, so I was like, "Well, what do I do now?" And I started looking, and I came up with this walking thing. And I was like, "Okay, I'm going to walk through Pompeii. I'm going to create this experience." And I was like, "Ooh, and now I can do smells, right?" And after that, I was like, "Oh, I'm going to do all this cool thing. I'm going to work with Innsbruck and create these experiences in Innsbruck." And then I was like, "Oh, maybe I can go and do a PhD instead." And so I feel like sometimes an idea has to die for you to move on to another idea that takes you in a great new direction, right? So it's just a little stepping stone along the journey. And if somebody wants my old idea, they're welcome to it. It's fine.
It's like composting your ideas.
It is totally sustainable.
Yeah, yeah. I like it a lot.
Funny.
Okay, I have all these things that you did and are still doing to kind of like get to the end of this conversation.
Mm.
What is the one thing that you still want to share that we didn't talk about you feel is really important? The one project that you feel you want to have like more energy and traction for?
Nothing. I think that you've just been a fantastic host. For me, I think the only thing that I would say that I haven't said is what a joy it's been to talk to you, because I think that sometimes these conversations, and again I sort of throw this out there, if you leave it in or not is up to you, but I think that sometimes we have these conversations, and you don't know what to expect. I mean, I've never spent a great deal of time with you before, and what a joy to have a conversation with somebody and just to laugh, right? I think so. I think that that's the only thing that I would say is laugh more, right? Come and speak to Anna and have conversations and have a giggle, right? Because life's too short to be miserable all the time.
Wow. Well, I will definitely leave that in. No, I just the thing is, what I really like is having these conversations, and to be a bit selfish, to learn, right? To learn from you. In this case, we talked about, right, the futures, painting. I learned it from reading, preparing this conversation, but also you made it a lot clearer in this conversation, in the beginning of this conversation, how, these conversations, these futures help us to, give us hope, but also to give us agency and to prepare us for possible scenarios that come up. Right, I made the connection between scenario thinking and your future thinking. I like that. I like that a lot. I think it's really important that we learn more about our futures, that possible futures, so that when something happens, we can prepare. I like reading history to learn from history to prepare us for the future, right? You bring up this Pompeii, this map of smells, right? So these ideas, how you bring them to life into like physical things and creations, things that we have difficulty of describing, how you make them describable, right? How you make them transferable between people. And I think that's a really cool thing that you do. And I loved, of course, because it's close to my heart, I loved how you are moving from, one idea to another idea, using ideas as stones for your next idea, and in a way building your life on all these ideas of, okay, this is where I'm gonna go next. This is where I'm gonna go next, and then slowly, the red thread in your life is gonna reveal. You're not pushing, you're just using, right? So I really like that. So thank you, Suzanne, for sharing your story and your ideas, and I think you will do a lot more than that.
And thank you. It's been so much fun. I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much.